everyone. We've got a little bit of a different background today. So before I was recording in the lab, but today I'm recording from home. So I picked an area in my house that has, it's kind of anthro-y a little bit, so you can see some of the art that either I have done or some of my students have done over the last few semesters. It's kind of like my little Darwin wall. I've got a little Darwin, like a little Darwin stuffed animal or whatever, like right there. Okay. So we're going to be talking about the forces of evolution today. And like I mentioned before on the other videos, you can either have, like me and, the PowerPoint pulled up dual screen on your laptop. You could just have me in your ear and you're watching the PowerPoint on your laptop. You watch me talk and then later you look at the PowerPoint. I really trust you guys to kind of figure out what works best for you. You might do one and then the other. You might do both at the same time. It's really up to you. But like I said, we're going to try to keep these kind of short and sweet. And so let's jump into the lecture. So this is the PowerPoint, that's the forces of evolution. So on the very first slide, we have one bullet point. And as it's kind of showing, this is so you can understand how simple this whole thing is. Evolution. This is the biological definition of evolution. It is a change in allele frequency in a population over time. So like even an easier way of saying that, because you might be thinking, okay, I know some of those words, but like what's an allele, right? So another way of saying this would be a change in genetic information in a population over time. We're going to be learning some of these other terms, like what is an allele, even like to be very specific about what like a population is. So we'll talk about that. But basically what it's saying is over time, genetic information will change within a population, right? Parents, offspring, et cetera, et cetera. So that's it. It's not super complex. It's not controversial, like, at its face. Now we can talk about, and we will in this class, we'll talk about the different ways this can occur and the complexities of the different factors that we look at depending on what type of evolution is occurring, like all of that, of course. But at its heart, it is a very simple concept and a very simple process, right? So if you're following on the next slide, you'll see it says the 5 forces of evolution, because the definition is a change in allele frequency in a population over time. But there is more than one way that can happen. There are actually 5 ways. So these are in no particular order, just the order I'm going to talk about them in. So the first is natural selection, then we have mutation, gene flow, genetic drift, and then non-random mating. Non-random mating is also sometimes called sexual selection. Either term is totally fine. Typically in this class I'll say sexual selection, it just makes more sense, but if you hear either term, just know that they mean the same thing. So we'll go through each of these. I got like a couple slides per. So moving on, the first one, natural selection. So per like the first bullet point, sometimes this is referred to as Darwinian evolution. So if you hear someone talking about Darwin and Darwinian evolution, that is a very specific reference to just this one type of this one force, natural selection. It's not a reference to the other forces. Sometimes people don't realize that and they use it incorrectly, but just so you know, Darwinian evolution is very specifically natural selection, so those two things go hand in hand. Now, these first few bullet points are talking about some of the ideas kind of built into this concept of natural selection before we even get to the process, like what are some of the premises, right? So the first thing is that we understand that heritability exists, that things are passed down from like parent to offspring, right? Like even if I asked you guys, give me like the basics for how humans have kids, right? You would say, okay, male, female, sexual intercourse, PIV, most likely, genetic information 50% from one, 50% from the other. Like we understand like these basics, right? So that idea that things are passed down that way is important because, well, for one, we didn't always, like we as like humans, right? We as scientists really, we didn't understand that idea. Now, of course, we do. So that's important to remember, because there was a time when they thought, well, how are things passed down? Now we understand, how that works, like, sperm, ova, all that stuff, mitosis, meiosis, all of that. The next thing, I'm kind of going in a random order, but variation. This is a very important concept that I will continue to talk about throughout the semester, well, throughout the 4 weeks that we're together, but variation. So variation simply exists. So like if we were in the classroom, I would say, oh, everyone look around the room and you're going to see different hair colors, different hair types, different nose shapes, different ear lobes, you know what I mean? Any and every trait, physical, behavioral, there's variation, whether it's us in the classroom, CSN campus, all of Vegas, you know, whatever your population you're looking at. That just variation for any trait or any behavior exists. And that kind of lends to that going down a couple bullet points to adaptability. That certain traits, depending on what's going on in the environment, certain traits, more so than others, are going to be advantageous. Another way of saying that is they're adaptive. You could also say like beneficial, but the term we would use in anthropology in terms of how we understand evolution, we would say they are adaptive. Those traits are adaptive. They're beneficial for that individual given that particular environment that they're in. Sometimes you have a trait that works really well in one environment, but that trait in another environment maybe doesn't work as well, right? So we'll go through a few of those examples probably through this PowerPoint and kind of throughout maybe a couple of the other ones. So what's important, those last two, well, the last one bullet point at the end, evolution has no goal. There was no, oh, I think I'm about to sneeze. Okay. There's no spirit of natural selection like out in the world saying you're gonna be big brained and you're gonna walk on two legs now. Like that's not happening, right? Nature's just doing whatever it's doing. You know, some people will say, oh, well, the whole thing is, you know, just random or chaotic. Well, no, the process is very specific. And sometimes, but when people usually say, oh, it's, you know, random, it's meaning like we can't always predict like what the genetics will be available in, you know, like 10 generations or something. So that part's a little more like unknown, but the process of how the genetics and the environment worked together is, we understand that, you know, that part's, it's very specific and precise, right? But there's no goal. It's not as if every animal is supposed to become, you know, bipedal, like walk on two legs, or every animal is supposed to live in the water, or every, you know, there's no goal that all animals are working towards, like in a hierarchy. So you can see here, even on this image, it's showing kind of that mentality of there's like a ladder showing, you know, plants to like bugs to other animals to like humans. And then on right next to it, you'll see like almost like a tree of life showing different branches with the different types of life forms on it. So in terms of how we would examine this evolutionarily, like as scientists, we would reference that idea like the tree, that all life is just different branches of, you know, the evolutionary tree. Every species is different and interesting in their own way. You know, you could have a personal opinion that, oh, I think humans are better than frogs, or I mean, whatever. But that's like a value judgment, right? That's subjective. And once we start introducing like subjective opinion or, you know, a value judgment of like good or bad or better or worse, that's now we're not really dealing with science anymore, right? So that's, you can have that opinion, I guess, as a person in the world, right? But that's no longer like a scientific view. So moving on to the next slide. Oh, just a little bit more detail about natural selection. So some of the terms we might use, differential reproductive success is one. Basically, that just means that through this process of you having traits that are really beneficial in a given environment allows you to maybe survive, thrive, reproduce a little, maybe more offspring or more successfully than someone else. That's all that phrase really means. And then also the term fitness. So you're going to hear this term, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more here in just a second, but the term fitness is a direct reference to how many offspring you have. So you could be more evolutionarily fit if you have, say, like 3 offspring than someone who only has 1 offspring. Or let's say you have 1 offspring, you're going to be more evolutionarily fit than someone like myself who has 0 offspring. So it's only a reference to the number of offspring because it's really a gauging, have you as an individual, whether you're a human or a frog or a rabbit or whatever, have you passed your genetics into that next generation? Like that's the whole point, right? So moving on to the next slide, like I said, kind of continuing this conversation, so you'll see the sloth, you know, the image of the sloth. This is also to reference, like I said earlier, you know, there's no goal towards all animals or all plants looking a certain way because it's not always like being fast is always better. Like it's sometimes, depending on the environment, it can be really beneficial to be slow. It can be really beneficial to be small. It just all depends on the environment. So there's a phrase that usually if you hear it like in a TV show or movie or something, it's almost always used incorrectly. And this is the phrase survival of the fittest. It is a very specific reference to what we just talked about a second ago, that concept of fitness. So measuring like the number of offspring and or like how much genetic information you have passed into the next generation. It's not about who's stronger or fastest because, like I even said, it's not a measure of that, but also even that's not really a true measure of anything valuable because it's not always better to be faster or stronger. Sometimes it can be better to be smaller or you can hide really well. It just depends on the environment, right? Like, are you the predator? Are you the prey? Are you living in water? Are you living on the land? Like, in any and every, you know, type of environmental factor beyond that, so. So it's a direct reference to this concept of fitness, of how many offspring you have passed into the next generation. Oh, and also it was Herbert Spencer, not Darwin, who said that. The next slide. You don't have to be faster than the bear. This is a very good concept to really conceptualize natural selection. So you might think, okay, natural selection, the environment and genes, certain traits are going to be better than others. Maybe it's this goal of kind of reaching this peak trait or this, pristine trait. It's going to be perfect for the environment. That's not how it is at all. It's like you don't have to be fast. You don't have to be faster than the bear. You just have to be faster than the person running next to you, right? It's not about being the fastest person. It's just you're maybe not the slowest, right? So sometimes so we see traits evolving. You're like, okay, that trait evolved from this to this. Well, this other thing isn't amazing, but it's definitely better than the previous thing, right? Especially considering if there was maybe an environmental change. So a really good example of this is, there are so many, but one that you would probably obviously be more aware of is bipedalism in humans. So humans, we walk on two limbs. This only started happening about 6 million years ago. We look at all the other primates, some are arboreal, but we see a huge portion of them are like quadrupedal, or maybe they're in the trees a little bit, But so for very specific, we'll get into this later in the semester, but for very specific reasons, and very important reasons, our lineage became bipedal and then maintained bipedalism even in the midst of some problems with it. Now, even today, 6-7 million years later, most humans, especially if they reach like a certain age in adulthood, most of us will have some kind of problem with like our feet or our knees or our hips or our back, simply because we are bipedal, simply because now all of our body weight is on two limbs rather than spread across four. Not because of a pathology, not because of an injury necessarily, just simply because now all of our body weight is on two limbs rather than four. So given the environmental shifts that were occurring at around 6-7 million years ago, bipedalism was really important, and it's maintained this whole time, so we know it's really valuable. But just because a trait is beneficial or adaptive doesn't mean it's like pros and cons, right? So the pros outweigh the cons, essentially. So keep that in mind. The next slide. So just kind of reiterating what I was saying a moment ago about evolution having no goal. All animals aren't trying to become human. Chimps won't become human. Like, that's not how any of it works, right? So let's say chimps continue to evolve and they even get, let's say, bigger brains, and then maybe they even start walking bipedally. They wouldn't be Homo sapiens. I hope you guys understand that. Like, Homo sapiens already exist, right? Let's say chimps became big-brained and more bipedal. They would be another name. They would be something else, right? Humans, I'm sorry, I'm like shifting in my seat. Humans, we already exist. So there's no goal towards being us. That doesn't make sense for like a multitude of reasons, right? So that's not how it works at all. On the next slide, so a really good visual of how natural selection works. So I like this visual. It's pretty simple, but it kind of gets to the point. So it's showing some bugs. So there's like a population of bugs, and some are orange and some are green. And then there's a predator. It's these birds, and the birds are talking to each other, and they say, oh, yum, the green beetles, those are our favorite. And so over time, it's showing that they're going to continue to eat the green beetles. And because of this, the green beetles are, not surviving, not thriving, reproducing, passing down the green beetle gene, And so those who are orange they're not being eaten, well, at least way less often. They are surviving, thriving, reproducing more. So what you're going to see is, over time, the orange ones have produced more offspring, and none of them are being eaten. And even if the green ones produce offspring sometimes, they're still being eaten. So you're going to see this population shift from like mostly green and a little orange to like maybe half and half to suddenly it's mostly orange, right? So that's natural selection right there. That's just one. It's a very simple example. It's looking at kind of one trait and one environmental factor, but like that's fine. We know it can be a lot more complex than that, but this is a very great illustration of how that would work. So there's a trait. It can be, apparently having orange coloring for whatever reason is a beneficial trait to have given this environment. In this environment, we're looking at one environmental factor, which is the predators, right? And so you're going to be able to survive and thrive and reproduce if you have that trait given that environment. Now, let's say the environment changes. Maybe there's a whole new bird species that's the predator, something like that. Maybe then they'll like the orange ones, right? So it's always looking at what's going on genetically, and then, of course, what the genetics tell you about what you're going to look like on the outside, your traits or behaviors, and then what's going on in the environment. So the next slide is mutation. So natural selection was the first force of evolution. Now mutation is the second force of evolution. So mutations occur at multiple levels, like genetically. It can happen at the level of like a nucleotide, like a base pair on, you know, like on a DNA strand. It could happen at the level of a gene, or like a package of information, or a section of a chromosome. It could happen at the level of a whole chromosome. It could be a deletion of something. It could be an addition of something. It could be neutral, advantageous, or disadvantageous. So most of us are going to have some random mutation in our body, right? But let's say I have a mutation that's neutral. It caused me to have, you know, like a freckle or something, right? That's not going to be an advantageous or disadvantageous factor in anything, right? I also could have a trait that becomes disadvantageous. So thinking in terms of like other animals too, maybe there's a bird that has a mutation for one of their wings is misshapen, right? So that would be disadvantageous for that bird. Or maybe a frog has a mutation where one of their feet is not formed or is missing, right? So then that could happen. Sometimes mutations are so detrimental that whatever animal it is doesn't even make it to, like, you know, doesn't even develop fetally. That can happen too, right? Or you can have a trait that's really advantageous. So I always like to use this example. This is dating me for sure. Ask your parents. They'll be like, oh, I know that movie. So there's this movie that came out in the 90s. Like I was young when it came out. But it's called Waterworld. And the premise of the movie is that like the polar ice caps have melted. And there's some humans still existing, but they're living on like boats and ships and stuff like that. There's a huge backstory. It's kind of like, you know, a lot of these like post-apocalyptic, you know, etc. I mean, I remember it being an okay movie. I haven't seen it in years. So, you know, I probably saw it once, maybe when I was like a little older. But anyway, so one of the main characters though, it shows, because they're basically all living on, you know, ships and boats, but a lot of them are in the water. They're getting food in the water. They're in the water a lot, active in the water a lot. And so one of these characters, he has a mutation. And he has like webbed toes. Now, in today's society, let's say you had webbed toes, that's kind of neutral, right? It's not going to really be a detriment to you. It's not going to really be advantageous, like evolutionarily speaking, right? Like maybe if it's a severe case, maybe that causes some, you know, issues with your gait or maybe some discomfort or something like that. But that probably wouldn't be the case for everyone. But in this scenario, if the environment has now shifted, and now there's water everywhere, if you have to maneuver in the ocean a little bit more to maybe to catch some food, being able to be a little quicker, having some webbed toes to, you know, swim faster or something, super advantageous. So here we have a trait in one environment, it's neutral, one environment, it's advantageous, right? So it all depends on what's going on, you know, in the environment as well. Next slide. Oh, so gene flow. So this is number 3, gene flow. This one's pretty simple. So imagine you have a population. So it's kind of showing you this visual right here. It's showing like a circle, like this, the individuals within this circle is a single population. And you can see it's showing there are some blue individuals and some red individuals. Basically, the idea of gene flow is sometimes individuals leave a population, sometimes individuals come into a population. Both of those scenarios cause a change in genetic information in a population over time, which is the definition of evolution. So in that sense, evolution is happening. So you could say how you have one population and there's like 50% blue, 50% red, and just some blue individuals decide they want to leave, right? They want to venture out, they want to go live somewhere else, whatever. Now the genetic makeup of that population has shifted, right? Or the opposite, you have a population of, you know, mostly blue and red, and suddenly a bunch of red individuals from another area come in and move in. Now it's a little more red than blue, right? So now the genetic information of that population has changed, you know, over time, but not because of a mutation, you know, not because of some environmental factor affecting a trait. It's just individuals coming in and out, but that still meets the criteria for evolution happening. Number 4, the next slide, genetic drift. So genetic drift, a few examples of how this would work. This is also sometimes referred to as neutral evolution. So sometimes we might see a trait that continues in a population, and it's not necessarily because it's super advantageous, it's just, that's just what's available. So like a good example would be, let's say, you know, there's a bunch of brunettes and they all get stranded on a desert island, and, you know, over time, you know, they reproduce and they create a little society. You know, everyone might be brunette, but it doesn't necessarily mean that being brunette on that island was like super important or super beneficial. It could just be, well, that's just what was available genetically, so now everyone's a brunette, right? Later on, maybe there's a mutation for, like, you know, red hair or something, right? So you could see a trait be very prominent, but it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't necessarily mean that it's advantageous. It could just be neutral. It's what was there genetically, so that's what everyone has. It's not detrimental, so natural selection is not like kind of, getting rid of it. It's just neutral. It's there. Hence why genetic drift is sometimes referred to as neutral evolution. So the PowerPoint slide gives you a couple other kind of terms for how this might work. So one is called the bottleneck effect. So it's kind of showing you a scenario of like a major event. So like a good example would be, let's say you're on an island, and one day it's a beautiful day outside, and one day some brunette people are going to go up on the hillside and have a beautiful picnic, enjoy the beautiful weather. And some of the blonde people are going to go down to the beach and like sunbathe and hang out on the beach. Now let's say then a natural disaster, so like a tsunami comes, right? Now just by random chance, right, happenstance, the people on the beach are probably going to be the ones that don't survive, right? So now you're going to have what could have been 50% blonde and 50% brunette on that island population is now almost all brunette, because the blondes, were all, the tsunami got them. And so once again, you have, and the reason it's called like a bottleneck, it's kind of showing like, oh, you have a bottle filled up with like all the individuals, and then the pinching is like the event, the natural disaster or something, and only a few kind of trickle out of it. And so then that's kind of the start of a new population. So you then might see, like I said, similar to the other one, you might then see on this island a bunch of brunettes, but it's not because being a brunette is necessarily advantageous or something. It's just neutral. It's just what was there genetically, like it's just what was available, so everyone just becomes a brunette, right? So that's genetic drift. And then the last one, non-random mating. So, and like I said, aka sexual selection. So sexual selection, basically the idea that whether it's humans or frogs or rabbits or whatever, that, and whether we're male or female, we don't choose potential mates just for random reasons. It's non-random. We have very specific reasons like why we would choose a mate. Now, a lot of this is evolutionarily, like kind of not like at the forefront of our head, like evolutionarily psychological, like not at the forefront of our mind, but we know there's so many cool like research studies that have talked about this. Sometimes it's personal history, which I guess is still kind of your environment, but like for example, so. I'm not single now, but a few years back I was on the apps a little bit, right? And I don't care if it was someone came up that was like my perfect match. If they had the same name as this one particular ex who had just been a real, I just couldn't. I was like, I don't think I could ever say that name again. I could never like say, I just didn't want to hear that name, see that name, anything about it. So like that was just my personal history, right? Like we all have something like that. Like, oh, I dated a redhead one time, I'll never date redheads again. That's not necessarily evolution, like particularly, but some of it really is, especially like I said, if you're a male or a female. Now also I will add, a lot of these scenarios we're going to talk about are like heterosexual scenarios. Obviously this makes sense because we're talking about like evolution and reproduction, right? We are a sexually reproducing species, so it's male, female, right? But sexual selection and non-random mating doesn't just apply to like heterosexual people. It applies to all of us. There's just kind of slightly different rules to how it might work a little bit, right? In the lecture, we get into this in a lot more detail. Next slide. So here we have an interesting image. So you'll see there are 3 females. Now, if we were in class, I would say everyone participate, right? But you can follow along. So you'll see there are 3 females, like 1, 2, 3, or like A, B, C, right? They all basically look the same, but the first one looks a little different. And usually I would let you guys kind of take a few minutes to oh, what do you notice? I'll just tell you now. So hopefully you notice the one thing, because like she's the same height, she's the same like breast size essentially, she's got the same arm length, like everything's the same except one thing, it's her waist. So in the first of the 3, her waist is pinched in, and this is called like the waist to hip ratio. So basically, and like this particular image has been used in multiple studies, like cross-culturally, and like they'll ask heterosexual men, like of these 3, which one do you find most attractive? And they will overwhelmingly, like statistically significantly select the very first one, because they're looking at like heterosexual males, like they don't realize this, they're just selecting the one they find the most attractive. But what in the back of their mind is coming out as a few different things, right? So one, the waist is small, and that makes the hips look more accentuated. Plus the hips are probably also a little more rounded. Now we know this, like what are the traits that happen during puberty for a male versus what traits happen at puberty for a female, human. For a female, obviously breasts growing, hips, the bone structure actually shifting, but also the fat is, you know, more on the hips and like the lower abdomen. And just as a side note, ladies, you are supposed to have that, right? This is a there's going to be, well, once again, there's going to be variation, right? Like not every female looks the same, right? But having this there is just the natural state of who we are as females, right? Anyway, so the male might just say, oh, I like her curves or something like that. But what he's not realizing that he's picking up on are all these really important things. One, it's showing that she's post-puberty, and so she can obviously reproduce. It's also showing that she has a pretty good store of fat, which is really important to gestating a fetus. So maybe some of you have heard of something called amenorrhea. Amenorrhea is what happens when, let's say, a female who has already had her period stops getting it. So let's say she's an athlete, or maybe she has like an eating disorder or something. She will stop getting it if her body fat drops really low. The body basically says, you don't have enough fat for you, let alone any reserve fat for any potential offspring. So we're just going to stop that whole process. Once her body fat increases, then, you know, her period will start again. But so considering kind of like how that all fits in, the male's not thinking in the forefront of his mind, oh, she's got a little bit of extra fat reserve, like, but that's like what's happening, right? So it's showing she's post-puberty, she's available for reproduction, she's got, you know, extra fat, which is going to be really vital for like a fetus. So all these little things that if you just ask most males, they would say, oh, I want to hold her hips. Like, they're not thinking of all these other things, right? Now, also, this slide, go to the next slide. It's not even really about the size of the woman. She could be a size 4, she could be a size 14. It's really just, is there that distinguishable waist? Because kind of along with this, you might be thinking, oh, extra body fat is good, but you don't want too much, right? There's in terms of health, like as a female, you want to have a certain amount. There's like a range of like what's considered healthy or not. So it's like, okay, here's the right amount. This is a little too much. This is probably a little too low, you know. And the male, like I said, heterosexual males aren't picking up on a lot of that, but the research shows a lot of this to be accurate. Now, if you go to the next slide, you'll see another example of this, or another example. You can see it's Scarlett Johansson, but it's like 3 different versions of her. One of these, oh gosh, I think it's the one in the middle is her. Oh wait, no, the one on the left is her, but the other 2 are like her left and right side mirrored. I think there was this whole trend on like TikTok, like last year or the year before, where people were mirroring their face and realizing like most of us have very asymmetrical faces. Basically, our right and our left side look very different, right? That's like normal. But you might not have known this, but the more symmetrical someone's face is, the more the left and the right side look the same, the more attractive that person is. Because now most people would just say, oh, you have a beautiful face. And if someone's face was kind of crooked, or, you know, you might notice that and think that was odd. Well, also, we're not really realizing, you know, now I'm telling you this so you'll know, but facial symmetry actually maps onto like general health and like parasite load and a bunch of other stuff too. So you might just be thinking, oh, I like that person's face, you know, they're attractive. But you're picking up on symmetry, which actually tells you something about their health, whether you're, you know, male or female. The next slide. So here you can see 1 through 5 of a male's face. So the heterosexual females, if you were looking at this, you know, which do you find more attractive? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Most heterosexual females, when asked this question, will pick either 3 or 4. And this is telling us some really important stuff too about, like if you just asked a woman, like, oh, why did you pick 3 or 4? They might just say, oh, I like beards. Want to run my fingers through his beard. You know, it's nothing too deep typically. But there is something else going on evolutionarily. What we know is that, as you can see, he looks a lot older, even though the only one thing that has changed in those images is the amount of facial hair. Now, a female selecting a mate in a male who is older, typically, ideally, right, knowledgeable about, you know, certain things, a little more mature, that's going to be, you know, a really beneficial trait for him to have. And we know that testosterone and hair growth are related, and so testosterone obviously, and a lot of this is considering like our earlier evolution, right, of, you know, males might have been more of the protector and stuff, and there's nothing wrong, we understand this right now, like male and female, even like, you know, in 2025, we look different. We are evolutionarily, we are very different from each other, right? Developmentally, you know, what happens at puberty, and then in our adult state, males have a drastic increase in their like upper body strength compared to a female. Like females have better hand-eye coordination. Like just evolutionarily, you know, we've seen these things through time, that males are a little stronger or better at XYZ, females are better at XYZ, So anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yes, testosterone. So you might want to select a male who has a certain amount of testosterone, not too much though. So most women won't select the one at the very end because you don't want him to be like aggressive, right? Which we know comes hand in hand with too much testosterone. So it's all about kind of finding, that balance. Now, like I said, if you ask most heterosexual women at the forefront of their mind, what are they thinking of? They would just say, oh, I like beards. Now, of course, there's also like cultural trends like beards are in or out or something like that, but this larger evolutionary trend will hold true. Oh, I'm just realizing that I had here something that I think I might skip, and I've already uploaded the PowerPoint to Canvas. I'm gonna leave this up here. And if we have time in class, I will go over it. I'm not going to go over it now on the PowerPoint because I might decide not to do it. But basically, if you're following along on the PowerPoint, you will see this is called the Hardy-Weinberg principle. It's probably the only time in this class I would have you do a tiny bit of math. You're probably thinking, don't do it, right? As you can see in these like 3 or 4 slides that are talking about this, there's a little bit to it. Which for this 4-week class, I did have to cut a few things out. So I might leave this out. I'm going to leave it on the PowerPoint just in case that you guys can have it as a reference point if I do decide to talk about it in class if we have time. But yeah, I won't cover it now because I have a feeling we won't. And perfect, I'm at 31 minutes. Okay. Hopefully you guys are following along with these well, and I'll see you guys on the next recording.